Welcome to Local 514. I'm your host, Savannah Craig. You may notice some changes to the show. Starting off, we'll be streaming at a new time. Every Tuesday and Thursday, we'll be streaming on Facebook starting at 7 p.m. In the future, we'll also be streaming on Instagram and our YouTube. You'll also notice that the episode will no longer only focus on one topic. We'll be covering multiple topics per episode. This will allow us to hear from more journalists, see new faces, and connect you to different issues occurring in Montreal. In today's episode, we'll be discussing migrant rights and the fight for status for all. We'll also be looking at the unique challenges that the neighborhood of Parc-Ex faces. And we'll also be discussing the variant that's on everyone's mind, Omicron. If you have a story idea or want to let us know what you think of the show, let us know in the comments. Canada paused deportations at the start of the pandemic. However, these resumed at the end of 2020. This was met heavily with criticism, especially in Quebec, as the provincial government deemed guardian angels from being deported. Guardian angels are non-status workers who work in fields like healthcare or in long-term care homes. But since then, guardian angels have been deported, most notably this summer. Canada deported people to 132 countries during the pandemic. These statistics are from earlier this summer. Many of those deported were asylum seekers, as well as returned to countries where there are high and dangerous rates of COVID-19. Earlier this year, Local 514 covered the plight of non-status migrants in Montreal. I spoke with Jesus, a non-status worker who is paid $10 an hour, compared to his colleagues who are paid $20 an hour for the same job. Let's see what he had to say.
The same job people with papers pay is $20 per hour. For me, $10.
Jesus, an undocumented migrant worker located just outside of Montreal, is barely making minimum wage, while his coworkers with status are making much more than him. In this episode of Local 514, we'll focus on Jesus' experiences and the exploitation of migrants in the workforce. I'm Savannah Craig, and you're watching Local 514. Jesus left Mexico as a result of violence, coming to Canada with the hope of safety.
The gangsters, if you oppose, they kill. I see 5, 6 men kill other person. The screams of this person, sometimes in the night, I hear his voice. Fue el último que pude soportar.
In Montreal, there are approximately 50,000 non-status immigrants. Non-status people often work in delivery services, construction, hospitality, healthcare, warehouses, and a lot of jobs that are essential to the everyday function of our society. But without status, they are left in precariousness, without access to healthcare, legal rights, and social services. This leaves them vulnerable to exploitation in the workplace.
When the people know him, you don't have papers, everything changes. You are more human. You are just a machine. I'm working 12 hours every day. I'm working all the week.
Eloy Rivas Sanchez is a professor of sociology and spokesperson for Solidarity Across Borders.
I'm going to pay you $10, even though I pay $25 to a local person. If a person says $10 or $15 per hour per worker, in a day, it's almost $100, right? So there is an economic incentive to people to abuse workers, undocumented workers, and that shouldn't be happening. That shouldn't be happening at all.
It's not always directly the employers that exploit migrant workers, but sometimes the exploitation is conducted by temp agencies. Stefan Christophe and Mustafa Henaway of the Immigrant Worker Center in Côte-des-Neiges have accompanied many clients exploited by temp agencies.
The corporation uses something that's called employment agencies, which are basically ways for companies to outsource the labor responsibilities they have under law.
The benefit of them using a lot of these temp agencies is that, well, I didn't know who they were hiring. I didn't know how bad the pay really was. And so they wash their hands clean because the blame is through the agency.
Solidarity Across Borders organized a dance rally outside of Canada's Immigration Office to demand status for Jesus and all other undocumented people living here.
Le statut pour tous! Le statut pour tous! Le couvre-feu maintient les sans-papiers dans une situation désastreuse. D'autres ont perdu leurs emplois, d'autres ont été obligés de quitter leurs emplois à cause de leur statut parce qu'ils risquent d'avoir des contrôles d'identité et que cela pourrait entraîner le renvoi dans leur pays.
Police have been conducting curfew checks to ensure that those who are going out are going to or coming from their essential job, with a letter from their employer stating so. Non-status essential workers fear for police finding out that they are undocumented during curfew checks, which puts them at risk for deportation. Last year, there were 5,731 deportations from Quebec, with 4,470 of these deportations from Montreal alone. The SPVM told Local 514 that it does not keep data regarding officers intercepting non-status migrants during the curfew. Before deportation, people are held in this holding center in Laval. A second holding center is currently under construction in Laval and predicted to be completed this year. If Montreal were a sanctuary city, non-status people would not need to fear the curfew. Montreal was previously declared a sanctuary city in 2017 under former mayor Denis Coderre.
Il n'est pas question que vous faites l'expulsion des gens ici. On va avoir ce réflexe de protéger les gens.
To properly qualify as a sanctuary city, Montreal's police force would no longer cooperate with the Canadian Immigration Enforcement. But Montreal police officers did not end cooperation with the Canadian Border Services Agency. In fact, calls from SPVM officers to the CBSA increased the year Montreal was declared a sanctuary city. The current administration has since removed the city's sanctuary status, with Mayor Valérie Plante stating that she feared it would give non-status people false security. The city has instead implemented a fearless access policy to offer municipal services to newcomers regardless of their status.
Je présente la motion visant à soutenir la régularisation des personnes sans statut légal.
The municipal government has passed a motion in support of regularization for all. The motion was proposed by Juliana Fumagalli, borough mayor for the neighbourhood of Villeray-Saint-Michel Parc-Extension.
It was a unanimous vote at City Hall. So this is what we're asking, making sure that everybody who's on Canadian territory be able to become a permanent resident.
This motion does not mean that all documented people in Montreal will be granted status, but that the municipal government supports status for all to put pressure on the federal government to provide this.
We don't have any powers with regards to immigration. I feel that there's a lot to be done with regard to the SPVM and their links to the border services.
Some say the city has a clear option to help its undocumented residents. Montreal can issue its own documents.
I would just point to the example of New York City.
It's a historic day because for hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers, this will be the first time they could get any kind of ID.
If you have an address, and that also I should underline includes shelters, you can get a New York City ID. And the NYPD was given directives that this New York ID card would be considered a proper ID.
It is a beautiful card, but really what's beautiful about it is what it stands for. It stands for everyone being respected, everyone being included.
Not a solution for everything, but at least people would have an ID card that was valid, that didn't depend on status from the federal government.
Don't forget us, please. We are essential. We need status for all.
This past weekend, Solidarity Across Borders, a migrant rights group, hosted a rally in support of status for all. Buba King, the spokesperson for Solidarity Across Borders, joins us today on the show. Buba, welcome to the show. Can you tell me a little bit about the event this past Saturday?
Yes. At first, the demand was a repetition of what we have been fighting for since now I joined Solidarity Across Borders. It's going to be 2 years now. But the message was mainly to demand again a status for all for the migrant without status here. But it was mainly provoked, or it was our decision to do this last protest was mostly pushed by the decision of the government, or their will, they say, to bring more people or more workers as the result of the worker shortage, or should I put it like that? And being from Solidarity Across Border and seeing all the migrants working around without status and seeing the important number, we thought that it would be a good idea to just include them in the process and give them the opportunity to work, have a decent living, and also participate in the development of the country.
Within Canada's decision to bring more migrants, would they be providing status to these migrants and not status to the current ones that are already here working?
Exactly. That was the main message of Solidarity Across Borders, because we definitely dealing with a lot of migrants, and knowing that the majority of them, the bigger number is hiding, but it's a reality, and it's thousands of people just in Montreal. So we definitely propose, or we definitely advocate for the regularization of those people that already live here, that are living in very difficult condition, and most of the time being exploited, especially at work, because it's the type of people, because I live in that condition too. And in sometimes you just against the wall, you don't have no other option to work under the table. And that's when all type of abuse are being experienced by especially the one that work under the table. So for us, it's a way giving status to those people, or giving status for all is a way to solve a lot of problem, which is like a chain of problem.
Regarding working under the table, in a former episode, I spoke to a migrant worker, Jesus, who was paid $10 for a job that folks with status earn $20 for. Is this a common thing that you see happen to non-status folks in Montreal?
Yes. I heard about. Personally, I never did experience it personally, but I did heard, or people did tell me about like the degrading amount of money that they're getting paid at work. Either it's going to be like $5 an hour or $10 an hour, stuff like that. But if it's not that, it's also like a bad condition of work. They might be getting paid something close to the minimum wage, but the work condition is absolutely not acceptable. So it's also a way, Status for All, our slogan is also a way to protect those people and prevent especially those practices that they experience at work.
Buba, could you detail some of the difficult working conditions that non-status people in Montreal face?
I would say longer hours that is supposed to be. Sometimes like shorter break or no breaks. Less money that is supposed to be paid for. And it's a lack of medical assistance in need. I want to say the protection in case of harms. They're actually not protected at all. And if in many cases it's dangerous work, or work in the factories, or where you're going to have to use knives and stuff, and you don't even have a medical thing to protect you, like in case you harm. So it's definitely a chain of stuff, and in other jobs too, like people can be experienced like different stuff specific to that job too. So it's definitely like a big problem for the workers, especially non-status, that are again back on the wall, and they don't have no other options, but in their mind, no other options than to just try to get money to survive. Yeah.
What happens in cases where, for example, a non-status worker may get COVID and they have to take a break from work? Are they supported, or is there maybe a chance that they could lose their job, not be able to return to work, things like this?
There is some resources where anybody can get access to for example, help or especially help related to like COVID stuff. But people with the undocumented or the people without status, they don't see those programs or those places as where you can go to get treatment as a safe place. They always have in mind that even at the hospital they might go and get caught there by the doctor and just call the police on them. So it's not rare at all to hear people that did catch the COVID but didn't say nothing or try to solve it by themselves. And in the majority of the cases, they end up in the worst case or even dying. And that's one of the reasons why in the last studies, it was shown that the non-status or the undocumented was a big part of the COVID death rate. So it's again a proof of the sick condition, the real condition that they're living in, and most of the time they don't really have assistance now.
During the pandemic, a lot of people have, experienced intense anxiety, difficulties to mental health, things like this. Would you say that this is much more intensified for people without status due to the fear of, CBSA being deported, things like this?
Oh, definitely. Even me being in contact with Solidarity Across Borders, I'm not even like, I'm lucky to be with them, but I can't even imagine somebody that is experiencing this by himself or without anybody's help. And that's a lot of people that going through that. So it is true that even before COVID, it was definitely hard for a non-status to just get it together. But yes, the COVID really did accentuate what we all been going through, and it's just like getting harder. It's true, and especially more dangerous, and we're more exposed to the risk of catching it by going to places all the time, like going to work and stuff. So without any medical insurance, so it's a risk too, and on top of that, the risk of having trouble or getting caught by the CBSA and all of that is very, very much big pressure for undocumented people. And one of the reasons why we don't lose any chance to stand up and protest and denounce it.
Last year, the Quebec government they made this deal with the federal government in Ottawa to essentially what they call guardian angels for non-status workers who work in the healthcare system, long-term care homes, workplaces such as these, that would essentially protect them from deportation and give them status. However, unfortunately, this is not legally binding, and since that was declared, I believe it was mid last year, the deportations begun again at the end of November, and even this summer, some supposedly called guardian angels were deported as well, and faced with the threat of deportation. What do you think about the situation?
Yes, and it's very upsetting. It's very sad to see how those people are very willing to, like soldiers, like risk their life to protect others or to show how they love the country and how they're willing to participate in the development and the safety of everybody. Being treated like that is not really what they deserve. It's true. But being from Solidarity Across Borders, we've always been also against that categorization of people, like to call these people like essential and the rest non-essential, or these guardian angel and the other not. So we were always preaching that everybody is essential. We need to work as a group, as humans, and give everybody the chance. It is definitely hard to hear that those people are treated that way, but that's again one of the reasons why we always stand up and we demand better treatment, especially for the undocumented. I personally know somebody that been called so-called a guardian angel, and he been like the last week we did a protest for him because he was on the way of being deported too. Luckily, he wasn't that day, but he's still under that deportation. So it's a reality, and yes, the guardian angel are being treated like that. They definitely are being deported, and it is sad.
What is this process like for someone who is faced with the threat of deportation? You know, are they faced with an estimated time, or is it kind of at any moment this could happen?
It depends. I do know that the immigration officers do have a lot of resources and a lot of way to go through the process, especially depending. It's a case by case, depending on the person's file. But yes, the deportations are. I'm sorry if you can repeat the question.
Yeah, of course. I guess I just want to understand more what the process of deportations are. You know, when someone is faced with the threat of being deported, do they have a certain window of time, or can this deportation happen, you know, at any time with, I guess, limited notice?
Yeah, so it depends, and also yes, usually, and I do think they do provide a date of deportation. Usually, the person knows when is it gonna be, but it's not always the case where it's going that way, where it's just you doing or waiting for it outside. Sometimes you can be locked up in the detention center. And over there is no limitation of time for them to hold you in order to deport you. So it's a place where I've been, and I saw some people that been held there for at least for a minimum of like 11 months, almost a year, and it could have been longer. So it depends. The process of deportation depends. But they do have the means of holding somebody with undetermined time and just send them whenever they can.
Did you say you've been to one of these centers before?
Yes. Okay. The Laval Detention Center. That's actually where I met Solidarity Across Borders. So.
Okay. Would you be willing to talk about this a little bit?
Yes. It was. Let's say 2 years ago now, it's gonna be almost. So I did miss my appointment at an appointment that I have with the immigration officers, and from there, because I was scared to show up, I didn't have a lawyer or nothing. So from there, they did a arrest warrant on my name. And it was after a couple of, like, let's say 2 months or something like that, that I did have an argument with the person that was renting me a room. And then he called the police on me. That's how they came and just saw that I had an arrest warrant coming from immigration, and then they sent me there. So from there, I've been there for like 2 months and stuff. And Solidarity Across Borders, that's when I met them, and they support us. We even did a hunger strike because it was at the beginning of the pandemic. So they support us through that whole process, and from then, like I joined the group, and I'm doing just like that. So.
And what were the conditions like at the Laval Detention Center?
Oh, not perfect. They were not great, and that's actually the reason why we decided to give up on food and everything. We did a hunger strike, and it lasted at least nine days. So, and it was as a result of bad treatment or a lack of measures taken, like as a response of the COVID-19 pandemic that just started at that time. So it was we had a lot of complaints, and that's what the reason why we did the hunger strike. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting to hear you were part of that. I actually remember when that was going on. And I've heard other really horrifying things about the condition of the Laval Detention Center, especially in regards to COVID. There's not much, I guess, social distancing. There's not much support for people who are experiencing COVID as well. Is this true in your experience?
Exactly. Oh yeah. We did experience all of that, and we did report everything. It was especially about the social distancing we started with. It was a very big issue because there was like tight corridors where we would take all the time. Our biggest worry was also the guards that going in and out, and they don't take no test. We don't know if anybody could bring it at any time. There were no social distancing, and yes, and then it was a very close environment. So no window and everything was closed. So it was a compilation of stuff like that make us ask them to do something, because we were seeing outside in the news that measures were being taken, like stuff that we'd never seen before, like, and then the street was empty, and on our perspective it was very, very serious. So we demanded to have like those measures too, because we wanted to be treated as humans. So that's some stuff we did experience there.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience. I just wanted to ask, if you could talk to Premier Legault or just in general the Quebec government or the federal government to convince them to provide status for all. What would you say?
It's a reality. It's a lot of suffering going on. A lot of people are experiencing, and we're talking about thousands. It's people that came here with at least hope to have a better life. Some of them came here for safety, and it's very sad to see them not very being treated as they expected. So it's again, for myself, I know politics can be complicated, but when I see the Canadian people and my friends, my surrounded, it's just beautiful, and I see all the love that people have, like for me, and all the love that's being shared. So it's a very beautiful place that people really are very. They're trying. It's worth a lot for them. They're ready to sacrifice a lot. So I'm just gonna ask them to give everybody a chance to at least just live a decent life.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to add, for anyone who may be watching this and maybe at risk of deportation, or just maybe want some type of support, whether legal or not, where can they reach out to Solidarity Across Borders for this type of help?
We do have a website. We on the social medias also, like on Facebook, on pretty much on every social media. Like just try to get in touch with us. I think there is numbers also. Anybody can reach us at. It's also on the website. So feel welcome to come join us, because our spirit is solidarity. We work together. We're gonna face everything together, and we're gonna go through it together.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much again. Talk soon, okay? We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned to hear how Parc-Ex has been affected by the pandemic.
As Canada reckons with centuries of colonialism, how is it treating Indigenous children today? Many advocates point to the foster care system as a continuation of the same motives that led to the residential school system. More than 50% of children in the foster care system in Canada are Indigenous, despite Indigenous children making up only 7% of the youth population in Canada. The 2015 Truth and Reconciliation report called for information about the proportion of Indigenous children within the foster care system to be made public. But in Montreal, we do not have statistics of how many children are Indigenous within the system. In the 94 calls to action by the TRC, the first 5 are reserved for the foster care system, including the demand to reduce the number of Indigenous children within this system. The TRC is not the only report to call on this. The Viens Commission released a report in 2019, and the Laurent Commission released a report in 2021, both focused in Quebec, detailing how Indigenous children, and Inuit children in particular, are being failed within the foster care system. Nagusset, the executive director of the Native Women's Shelter, says that the Native Women's Shelter and Batshaw Youth and Family Centres, located in Westmount, formerly had a collaboration agreement. It was signed in 2013 to improve services that Indigenous children and families received from Batshaw. Nagusset said this collaboration ended when Batshaw merged with the CIUS.
How do you make the youth protection more indigenized? Well, you let us in the door. You allow us to have a conversation. We are not even there yet. Batshaw has an Aboriginal team. So they have so many kids in care that they actually have a team, but there's no one Indigenous running that team.
Batshaw has recently come under fire after an Indigenous team was forced to self-isolate in a windowless basement room where the teen had no access to books and their cell phone had been confiscated. In 2018, sources identified that within 2 group homes run under Batshaw and the CIUS, several youth were told not to speak Inuktitut to one another. Staff said that this was a safety issue in order to know if they were planning to run away or cause harm. Local 514 reached out to Batshaw to request an interview. However, they were not available for an interview before the publication of this report. Racism and cultural misunderstanding has not only been directed at children, but at Indigenous parents as well.
We at the Native Women's Shelter have a worker called the family care worker, and she's had a conversation with youth protection where the social worker told her, this Inuk woman, I don't believe she doesn't speak English. I think she's faking it. Or maybe if she's not faking it, she drank too much and she's just brain dead. So when an institution feels comfortable talking that way about an Inuk woman, that's a problem. And that is rampant in the foster care system.
A recommendation in One Step Forward, Two Steps Back, a report co-authored by Nagusset focused on child welfare services for Indigenous communities in Montreal, states that employing more Indigenous staff is a necessity in order to improve the well-being of Indigenous children and reduce racism and colonial practice within this system. However, Nagusset says there has been a difficulty in keeping Indigenous staff around.
I've known other Indigenous people that worked at Batshaw and basically cried every single day and then quit. So if you want Indigenous people to come in and work there, you need to be culturally supportive.
The Laurent report, which was released in early May, identified the cultural gap between youth protection workers and Indigenous families, which ultimately negatively affect these families as this contributes to discrimination and overrepresentation of Indigenous children within this system.
A lot of the youth protection, they don't understand what SAGE is. They go into someone's home who's smudged and say, this client was smoking pot. And that shows up in the court system. Even though the social worker and the woman says, no, I'm just smudging. I'm just using SAGE. Later on, it showed up in the courts that they did a visit and they smelled of pot. And when I talked to, youth protection about this, they were like, well, I don't know what SAGE is, so I can understand. I'm like, well, then, educate yourself. Like, seriously, why is it our job to educate you? Where is your will to make the steps to know better? Why is there this, resistance?
Larry DePoe, Interim Executive Director for the Rising Sun Child Care Center, a daycare in Verdun run by Indigenous workers for Indigenous children, says that the system is a continuation of colonialism.
We feel very strongly that the foster care system with Indigenous people is a throwback or a vestige of colonialism, that as long as Indigenous peoples do not have control over their own families, their own fostering systems. This is just a repeat of the colonial past of Quebec and Canada.
So why can't Indigenous communities be in control of their own foster care system? Federal Law C-92 allows for Indigenous communities to create their own child welfare systems.
Our government is investing $542 million to Indigenous communities to exercise full jurisdiction over child and family services. This is vital to moving forward on our promise to address the unacceptable injustices that too many kids and families have faced in the care system.
However, the Legault government has exempted this law in Quebec. Local 514 reached out to the Minister for Health and Social Services, Lionel Calmont, and the Indigenous Affairs Minister, Ian Lafreniere. However, we did not receive a response before the publication of this interview. The Native Women's Shelter is trying to find a way around Quebec exempting law C-92.
We were actually in the process of doing a proposal on how we can start changing the system. Mm-hmm. And it was like a 3-tiered project. And a lot of research component inside, but at the end of the project, then actually having the research to say, these are the recommendations and this is what we can do.
This proposal includes a mentorship program pairing Indigenous youth with an Indigenous mentor, the creation of an advisory committee to develop training and recommendations used to educate those working within the foster care system, offering a youth protection support worker to educate workers within the system of the impacts of colonialism and residential schools on families, among other essential improvements to the system. The goal of this is to generate solutions within the foster care system that are informed by those with lived experience.
I think that the history of this country has shown just recently how little most white people know about the history of what's happened with Indigenous peoples in this country. And that's come to light very, very recently and very clearly to people that we really don't know enough about the history of what's gone on with our First Nations and Indigenous people here in Canada. That's so clear. So yes, there's a lack of knowledge for people working in that system in terms of being able to understand Indigenous culture, Indigenous living, and so on, and a tremendous amount of misunderstanding.
Parc-Ex is a neighbourhood with one of the highest population rates of newcomers to Canada. With language and cultural barriers, things like food insecurity, rent evictions, and COVID lockdowns are much more difficult to these residents. We're joined by Leonora Indira King. She's a community organizer and ran in the most recent municipal elections in Parc-Ex under Quartier Montreal. Hi, Leonora. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi. Nice to be here.
So you ran for the riding in Parc-Ex in the most recent municipal elections. Can you tell me a little bit about what your goals were for Parc-Ex?
Yeah, well, I mean, the municipal level of politics was interesting to me because I think that's where you actually do see or are able to push for changes locally that are impact and concrete. And that's the level of politics where you can be more closely connected to the residents, right? And they're not kind of ephemeral kinds of decisions or policies. They're really applicable. And I think that requires also knowing your community and knowing the neighborhood. And in which case, I've been working closely with the neighborhood at Parc-Ex, so felt that I was connected to the residents and their needs, and as a result, in a position to better advocate for them at that level. So, it's just one level, but there are various ways that we try to advocate, right, in terms of community groups or with the institutional partners that we work with. But there are some things for sure that if we can have, in terms of the upper echelons of support, that would be ideal, right? So that was my intention with running.
How has the pandemic specifically affected Parc-Ex?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways. It's the population in Parc-Ex first of all, there's, I want to say, like the highest proportion of immigrants compared to the rest of Montreal. They are a lower income neighborhood, and a lot of factory workers, restaurant workers, and stuff like that. So in terms of, with the pandemic, there were a lot of people that were able to transition over to working virtually, but for, a certain significant population of Parc-Extension, this was not an option to be able to work remotely, right? There's all kinds of barriers, economic and cultural and social, let alone digital and technological. So that is something in terms of like being able to even use technological mediums to be able to work was not necessarily an option for some of these residents. So that was one in terms of them not being able to really have the choice to work virtually and were kind of dependent on their jobs and going into work. Many of whom also didn't have they're already kind of stretched financially, right? So there was for sure, we saw during that time, there's a lot of need in terms of the community groups, but there was a bit of a, I guess, gap because a lot of these community groups were closed in terms of welcoming residents. So accessing the French classes to promote the integration of many of the allophones in Parc-Extension was no longer possible. So, and many I know stopped because they couldn't do the online classes. They were only available to do the in-person classes. So this kind of stalled them in terms of just preparing them for the job market and for their integration. And as for being able to utilize the community resources, this was made a lot more difficult because they were closed to the public or had very limited services and resources available for the community. So they were hit particularly hard. But fortunately, many community groups during this time were given additional funding to be able to curb the demand. Some of the community groups I work with did receive some of this funding, but not all. And it was still really, really difficult to be able to to do outreach and get these residents what they need. I know the food banks exploded in terms of the number of people that were attending. So we definitely saw some real impacts there. So those are just some examples of how COVID impacted these residents.
Thank you for sharing. I wanted to talk a little bit more about food insecurity because I know that even pre-pandemic, this was something affecting some residents of Parc-Ex. Do you have maybe any estimates about, how much more this affected Parc-Ex during the pandemic?
Yeah, I don't know about exact numbers, and I'm only kind of familiar with the food bank that Africo Féminin provides every Tuesday. I know prior to the pandemic, they were serving about 200 to 300, and I think during the pandemic, it started to be upwards of 400 or 500, even 600 on some crazy weeks. There are several food banks in Parc-Ex, but I think this one is probably the most accessible or serves the most people. So there were, I know that there were some residents that were just trying to get whatever they could from several at a time to be able to, because don't forget, in Parc-Extension as well, they also have one of the highest proportions of families with young children. So we're not just looking at residents that are looking to feed themselves, but they're looking to feed their families.
Would you generally say that, excluding community groups, just our politicians here in Montreal, would you say that they're underserving the community of Parc-Ex and maybe not helping so much?
I mean, the community sector in general, not just in Parc-Extension, but in the city, I believe that this is definitely a sector that is constantly under-resourced and underfunded. In Parc-Extension, I mean, one of the good things is that there actually are many community organizations there. They're there to support. There's clearly a need. They need to exist. But they're still stretched, right? And they're kind of all competing for the same resources in that borough. So in terms of numbers and when the allocation goes out, I know a big chunk is going to Parc-Extension, but in comparison to other boroughs, I've heard, and I can't confirm the numbers, but that the borough of Villeray-Saint-Michel Parc-Extension actually receives less than some of the other boroughs in terms of funding to the community groups. The reason for this is unclear, and I would have to confirm the numbers, but this is something that I did hear during the campaign, and I believe the borough of Côte-des-Neiges and Notre-Dame-de-Grâce is the other borough that's hit hardest also, in terms of having like a bigger population to serve in relation to Parc-Extension, Villeray-Saint-Michel as well. But for some reason, despite the larger population, are not funded the same way, at least with respect to the community groups in those boroughs.
What needs to be done to provide more funding to these communities?
I mean, there's various ways to go about it. I mean, of course, that pressure and to be speaking to our borough mayors and our city councilors and conveying what the needs are of the community, and that we need to be more, consistent whenever we are allocating the funds from the budget each year, because they do have a say in how the funds are redistributed. So that's one level. Two is, I mean, because we're stretched and we can't only depend on the municipal funding resources, there are some community groups that have started to reach out to the provincial and federal governments for funding. But you need the means, and you need to also know the language of grant writing to be able to apply for those funds. Not all community groups have that ability, so they kind of are a bit, dependent on the usual sources of funding, which are precarious and which are prone to being cut on an annual basis. I've seen that happen myself in this past year. So as I would like to see more resident engagement, because if the more residents that are showing up at the borough council meetings or at the table meetings, the more we can let our, municipal politicians know that we're seeing an issue, we're seeing it unaddressed, and if it's left unaddressed, the problem is not going to go away. It's going to get worse. It's going to impact our economic in another way down the road, longer term, right? So I think participant engagement, the municipal governors valuing, I think, the supports that are in place already, and making sure that they are supported, and respecting, I guess, the citizens and residents in other neighborhoods as much as they do in others. Like, I feel like Parc-Ex seems really, really neglected if you look at the upkeep of other neighborhoods compared to this one. So, yeah.
Do you think that things like systemic racism, xenophobia plays a role in lack of funding towards communities like Parc-Ex and Côte-des-Neiges?
I mean, it's hard to say explicitly if that's going on. I know I was part of a public consultation on racism in Parc-Extension, and there was a report compiled based on residents' experiences with systemic racism and a lot of the barriers that they were experiencing in the workplace or even accessing social services. What was done with that report, I would have to look back and check. But I mean, I feel like we kind of get into like a class debate here if we kind of delve into that issue a little bit more, because race and class are tied together. And I feel like with a neighborhood like Parc-Extension, which is composed of mostly marginalized groups, lower income groups, I guess they're not seen, I don't know if they're seen as not as valuable to society, if they're not contributing as much. But I feel like there's definitely a lot of prejudices and fears. A lot of people thinking Parc-Ex is dangerous, for example. I don't know, does that translate into feeling like it's not worthy of intervention and public funding? I don't know. I mean, those are kinds of questions that we would have to really look at higher up and see what are the reasons for their decisions in allocating funds to certain boroughs and not others. So, and long story short, it's possible, but it's just difficult to say explicitly if that's what's going on. Yeah.
Thank you. In a former episode of, in a few episodes of Local 514, we've spoken to Amy Darvish from Comité d'Action de Parc-Extension, and last winter she was on the show speaking about social housing in Parc-Ex, as well as the increased rate of rent evictions as a result of the Université de Montreal campus opening up nearby. This was probably in maybe February or March. I spoke with her about this. Since then, what do you think has happened to the situation? Has it evolved maybe in terms of more rent evictions, things like this?
I mean, CAPE is doing wonderful work. Amy's doing great work. They are constantly, I guess, utilized as a resource. There's a huge demand, and we're really grateful that they exist because in Parc-Extension in particular, I think they're hit particularly hard. I do feel that because a large majority are immigrants who don't necessarily speak English or French, they've just arrived to the country, they don't know their rights. I feel that sometimes, yes, what happens is that they are exploited and they are pushed out, they are evicted because they don't know any better. And there's a lot of housing issues like in the neighborhood in terms of like overcrowding, just unsanitary conditions, landlord abuses, and even just the conditions of the streets and neighborhood is really, really discouraging. But I feel like there has been more advocacy because this has really been something that's been hitting the neighborhood hard. And we've been hearing really sad stories about families being evicted. And, it's a community in which I feel like everything is in proximity. There are grocery stores where they can get their local ingredients and stuff like that. It's really a hub for this cultural group to kind of to feel safe in, and to have to leave their neighborhood and their communities behind. I feel like it has a lot of like negative impacts. But there has been additional pressure, yes, thanks to CAPE, and they came out recently with an anti-eviction mapping project, which has been made public, and this kind of highlights certain streets, buildings that have been, I guess, targeted or have a reputation for maybe abusing tenants or evicting tenants. So I feel like being able to expose where the abuses are happening adds more pressure. So the landlords, kind of have to stay on their toes and know that we're watching, and there are advocacy groups to go in on residents' behalf and stand up for what is right. We did try to go in as our political party, Quartier Montréal. We had been pushing for more rent regulations as well, because we saw that, with the impacts of gentrification, that the rent increases were going up drastically, jumping. I understand gentrification happens in other neighborhoods, but we were seeing it happen at a faster rate in Parc-Extension compared to other neighborhoods. So as politicians, we can push for more of those regulations so that landlords are held accountable and that understand that if you are doing renovations and you jack up the rent, you do so proportionally. Or if a tenant leaves and another tenant comes in, again, the rent increasing proportionally, and you have a registry of that. So when you're coming in as a new tenant, you know what the rent was before, if renovations occurred, and everything is transparent and on the record. So these kinds of things will help. But again, we have to keep advocating for it. And it doesn't help that many of the municipal politicians we've seen come into power are landlords themselves. So there is a conflict of interest themselves in terms of not necessarily protecting the rights of tenants, but more protecting the rights of landlords. Mm-hmm. So this is also just something that we should be aware of.
Mm-hmm. In Valérie Plante's campaign promises, one of them was to create this landlord registry. Unfortunately, it would only be for units buildings with about 8 or more units. But do you have faith that promises like this will come to fruition, or just that in Plante's second term, there might be more help and attention drawn towards Parc-Ex?
Mm-hmm. Well, I know for a fact that we had fought for that registry as a borough. I know this from Juliana Fumagalli, who was the former borough mayor for the last 4 years, who had advocated twice for this rent registry. And the first time it was rejected. Projet Montreal was on one of the parties that were on the deciding committee. So the fact that it was that we had to keep pushing for it, and now Projet is coming around and saying, "Oh, we're doing it now," but I'm like, well, you rejected it initially, so I lack a little bit of trust in how they're going to follow through, because there was also promises in terms of social housing. I understand that development takes time. But just in terms of, like, I've seen them flop on other things or flip-flop on other things. Like, for example, we did an interview on the whole defunding, right? And we are all aware that they said one thing and then did another. So I don't have complete trust that, they can do the same thing with the housing issue. I don't know. Now, in terms of the promises for social housing, let's see. I know of the ones that have been promised. We haven't seen like a whole lot go into Parc-Ex. They've gone into other neighborhoods, and we've still had to put pressure on the city to acquire certain buildings with the intention of converting them into social housing. So because there are buildings that are on the list for the right of first refusal, which means the city has priority to acquire those buildings and purchase them for other purposes like social housing or community centers. So I'm skeptical how the party will maintain their promise just because of previous program promises.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to something you mentioned a few minutes ago in regards to rapid gentrification of Parc-Ex. Do you think that this is linked to the new UDM campus, or maybe linked to people being pushed further and further out of downtown, or anything else for that matter?
Yeah, it's both. Definitely, UDM is well aware because we've put pressure on them, and we've tried to encourage them to build their own student residences, or to at least be accountable or give something back to the community in terms of the displacement that it's caused. But from what I understand, they haven't been the most cooperative. So yes, that's definitely one influence. And like I said, I do realize, like, development does occur, neighborhoods do change, and people, yes, they do get pushed further and further out. But yeah, the fact that it's happening at a more rapid pace in this neighborhood, I think, has partly to do with the fact that with the university, but also because I feel like it's a population that is vulnerable. So people think that they don't know their rights, and that they can take advantage of the situation. In other parts of the neighborhood where people are well versed in terms of the services available, their rights, even the languages, they can advocate for themselves. But in a neighborhood like Parc-Extension, it's not as easy. So I think that's also one of the reasons why, the many residents have been taken advantage of. And they're able to do these renovictions and increase the rents. And there isn't proper consultation on how this should be done in a more humane way, given the population characteristics.
Thank you so much. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you think is important to consider regarding Parc-Ex and food insecurity, gentrification, things like this?
Mm-hmm. No, I mean it's a whole lot. It's it's definitely impacted in a lot of ways. We see that these, I feel like housing is a basic human right, access to food, and there's just a lot of basic needs that we're struggling to have met for Parc-Ex residents. So a lot of the community groups are there to kind of support in the best ways that they can, but they're stretched as well. So, I mean, I think it's important to be aware when people are coming into the neighborhood and they're buying property in the neighborhood, that they understand the history of the neighborhood and really some of the struggles that people are struggling with, because I think people are not aware, and I don't know if it's hard for some to know. They're not going in their homes. They might not necessarily know what's going on, but yeah, we do know that this is definitely a neighborhood that is vulnerable and that are struggling to meet some basic needs. And so I think we have to do more as a society and people that do have the means and the resources to support this neighborhood.
And for those who do have those means, do you have any organizations you want to shout out, or just any ways they can get involved to help out?
Yeah, there's so many. I mean, of course, I'm close to Africa Femine. I feel like they do a lot for the community with very little resources, and I know their heart is in the right place. And we've been mobilizing a lot. CAPE as well. I would say CAPE, Brick by Brick, and Africa Femine are the ones that I know very well, and that we have certain, I guess, roles and responsibilities, but we always go beyond that because there's a lot to do. So I believe they all take donations and all take support. I know Africa Femine for sure is doing something for Christmas in terms of trying to deliver food baskets and gifts to children, and also raising money for the buildings that they're trying to acquire. Same thing for Brick by Brick. So in addition to acquiring a social housing building for low-income residents, we now have a community center, and so we're just trying to raise some funds to finish off the renovations so that we can have an additional resource for residents and meet maybe some of the needs that are not currently being met by the community organizations in Parc-Extension. So yeah, I would look them up: Brick by Brick, CAPE, and Africa Femine, and support however you can.
Thank you so much for your time, Leonora. It's a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks, Savannah. Have a great day.
You too. Talk soon.
All right.
Okay? Thanks.
Bye. No problem.
Less than 2 weeks ago, the Omicron variant was declared a variant of concern by the World Health Organization. Some countries have been banned from traveling to Canada. With the possibility of further travel restrictions on the horizon, how do Montrealers feel about the Omicron variant? Let's see what they had to say.
What are your thoughts on the Omicron variant and the possibility of a second lockdown? Another lockdown.
Another lockdown is very subjective. We don't know whether it will happen or not. the first and foremost thing is we should talk about individual responsibility. I think the main responsibility of everyone is to get vaccinated. So if you are vaccinated, the chances are lower, statistically speaking. So statistically speaking, your chances are lower if you have a vaccine. So we should do our part, and if everyone does their part, we will be safe. Yeah, there will be new variant coming in because science is evolving, so the viruses are evolving as well, or the vice versa, you can take it. Sorry, I messed it up. But I think like if everyone is actually vaccinated, the odds are lower. I mean, not any vaccine, the vaccine which is approved by the government because they did, or the CDC or the Health Canada which they approved, I think we should get those vaccines. And if we have the vaccine, and no matter what variant comes, at least there will be some threshold, or at least there will be some protection rather than not having vaccine at all. So I think getting the vaccine is the first thing, and then maintaining the status quo rules and regulation would be really helpful. Not, I think that would be fine. But the virus is at a very nascent stage to say something, because they need more of research and all. We exactly don't know where the origin is exactly from. Yeah, we know many countries found it, but how did it origin and all? It's still yet to find, So the best thing, what is in our circle of influence, is to get the vaccine, and the things which is not in our circle of concern, we should not think about it. That's what I think. Yeah.
Apart from the fact that we have this new variant, I don't know if you also noticed, like numbers generally in Montreal went up, like the past 2 weeks or so. There were more cases of COVID. So it's like that plus the new variant. Do you think that could lead to? So some people are speculating: are we going to have another lockdown? So what are your thoughts on that?
It's not easy to say if there is a lockdown. Yeah, many people wish for a lockdown so they can sit at home and play computer games, But I'm just joking about it. But it's very hard to say whether we'll have a lockdown or not. But yeah, there will be limited access, or maybe, I'm not sure. It's very hard to say. I can speculate a lot of things, but it doesn't make it right, So speculation is something that can alter a lot of critical viewpoints. So I don't want to speculate on anything.
Okay. Let me see. In conclusion, how do you have faith that whatever happens, the Canadian government, the Quebec government are gonna do what is necessary?
Yeah, definitely. If you see, we initially it was very hard to get the vaccine, but once it started, everyone was getting the vaccine. So once initially people were complaining that there's no vaccine. But when a vaccine came, many people were saying, this vaccine might not work. So people will always have something to say, something to criticize about all the time. But as long as we do our part, which is to get the vaccine, I hope things will be good. Because forget about politics or government or anything. As statistically, if you see, whoever gets vaccine have less chance of getting the virus. So that's the maximum we can do today. But if Pfizer is making pills for COVID, and maybe it might be much better. We don't know. So I think we should take all the necessary measures, which is sound and which is a common sense. Then we all will be good. But if we don't do our part and we complain, nothing is going to happen. So as at the last message, I'm saying, new variants might come because the weather is changing. Maybe it's something else. I don't know. I'm not a biology student. But the maximum I can do is to get vaccinated, and the maximum I can do is to ask people to get vaccinated. So get vaccinated. So it will be good for all of us. So hopefully we don't have another lockdown. I hope so.
Your thoughts on the new COVID variant and what you've heard about it so far?
I haven't heard about the new COVID variant much, but the thing is that what made me what grabbed my attention towards it, that Canada just 2 days ago closed its borders from certain countries from Africa. One of them was Egypt. So that was the one that actually grabbed my attention towards it, because I had relatives coming next week, and they canceled plans because of the COVID. I don't know. I feel like if this variant spreads too much, I feel like we should head towards online again, which will be not really challenging, as we have already done that like in the past year, but I feel like, because personally, my whole experience of university was online. This is like my first in person, so I would hate it to be like online next semester. But if it's like, if it's a must, like I'm with it, I'm completely with it.
So you had family coming to visit you?
Yeah, I had family coming like next week.
And now they can't come?
They can't come because the borders are closed due to the variant.
So like, is it just a case of like waiting, or like what? Like, are you what is the plan now?
I don't know, just like waiting to get more information about when the borders are going to open to that certain countries in Africa. And then from there, I will see that if my relatives will be able to even come and see me, because you don't know for sure when it's going to open or like it's gonna close again. That's the thing.
Okay. You said your whole schooling has been online. So
yeah, my whole experience through university has been online.
What year are you in now?
I'm second year.
Oh, okay. What do you think there's a chance that there might be another lockdown, or you might go back to online schooling?
Yeah, I feel like I don't really know, but I feel like the step where they closed the borders, I felt like there's a lockdown coming soon. That made me feel that way.
And how would you feel about that?
To be honest, personally, I wouldn't like it, because nobody would actually like a lockdown. But if it's a must, then I'm completely with it. Whatever it's necessary. So yeah, but I would hate like for the university to return to like online platform again, because that wasn't like really a good experience with me, at least.
Okay.
Also, why do you think they're also quick to ban African countries? Let me ask that too.
I mean, since you're from Egypt, like, would you say? No, that's a good question. Would you say there is like almost like a hastiness on the part of like European and North American countries to place bans on African countries more than like the other European and North American countries when they hear anything about like these kind of cases?
Yeah. Actually, I do feel that, because like most of the countries in Africa, if not all, are considered like third world countries. So like I feel like they're locking down from like African countries or like countries from third world countries in general, because they feel like there's not really actually secure like health measures taken in those countries. So I feel like they just like whenever like a pandemic spreads out, or like in Egypt as well, I haven't heard much of Egypt about the spread of the new variant. And I asked a lot of my friends, they said that they know nothing about it. So in Egypt, it's not like the awareness is not spread that much. So I have a feeling that's why they ban it. Because like when I was in Egypt, we didn't really, when the COVID started, I was back in Egypt. We didn't really know what was going on, because like Egypt took a really bad security measures regarding COVID, because it waited until a lot of people started dying, a lot of people started catching the virus, and then it started lockdown. And the lockdown wasn't really, not everyone was following it. It was more of making like a statement that you were following the lockdown to prevent COVID than actually really like caring for the citizens. So I have a feeling that the first world countries, like maybe like Canada, America, the US, do that just in a way like, because security measures are not done that properly in third world countries, like thus Africa.
Okay, lastly, in terms of being in Quebec and being in Montreal, would you say if we're going to have another spike, a huge spike in cases, you have faith in like the system here to combat that or to address that effectively?
I don't know, but I like personally I've lost faith in like life returning to like pre-COVID time, because I feel like we're going to have to live with the virus from now on. So I feel like either way, if security measures, like health measures are taken into consideration, we'll always be like thinking in the back of our heads that there's still a virus, there's COVID going around, and we have to take precautions.
Do you feel safe in Montreal?
Like from the
in terms of like you're being protected from any like I said, in case it gets bad or anything, do you feel like the government, provincial,
regarding the virus,
will handle it adequately here?
Yeah, it's not the worst. It's good. Like I feel like security measures are being taken, like in uni, in the metro, in the bus, you always have to put your mask on. If you don't have your mask on, I guess like you gotta put your mask on. So yeah, I feel like from the virus, I think that I'm like 80% safe. And the rest is like on me for like rubbing alcohol, like whatever. So yeah, I feel like it's safe here from the virus.
Local 514 is looking to expand. That means hearing from you, Montreal. Want to join the team and produce a news package? Want to pitch ideas? Reach out to CUTV to find out more info on how to get involved. Tune in every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. on CUTV Montreal's Facebook page. To keep up to date with the newest episodes, follow us on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. And follow Local 514 on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.